Great. Okay. I have exactly 4 minutes before my next appointment. So what I suggest we do, Hamid, is the following. I summarize the thesis. I've emailed you my speech, and feel free to circulate it with others. So the first point I wanted to make is, yes, we have seen a structural break in US trade policy this year. I don't think I need to belabor this point. The video that you showed the reciprocal tariff regime, amongst other factors the United States is engaged in. I think the key question to ask is what is really driving this? And there, the thesis that I have in the short speech I was going to give is that essentially the United States has prioritized security considerations over commercial considerations in the redesign of its trade policy. We should not be surprised by this. In the paper, I described the three regimes of US trade policy since since 1945. The first regime up between then and the creation of the GATT and to the end of the Cold War involved the United States essentially creating a trade regime with allies and restricting the liberalization to those allies. So membership was restricted largely, and liberalization was restricted. Of course, there are wrinkles. Poland joins the GATT in 1967 and is, of course, a member of the Warsaw Pact. But in the broad scheme of things, from 1945 or 1947 through to 1989, the United States subordinated trade policy to its security objectives. And those security objectives were reinforced by open trade because the US wanted its allies to be able to grow and to be able to afford money to spend on defense. So this essentially linked trade and security in ways which were evident at the time. Once we get beyond the end of the Cold War, then we see the United States sees itself as primus inter pares. There's no competitor anywhere on the scene, and so takes a more generous attitude. Security considerations fall away and commercial considerations dominate. And this is the phase we have until about 10 years ago. During that phase, of course, we see efficiency driving the reallocation of capital. We see supply chains developing, all facilitated by information communication technology. As my colleague Richard Baldwin describes this, the so-called second unbundling, the principal, or not the principal, an important beneficiary of those changes was China. And China, of course, then grows very quickly and becomes and returns to the central place in the world trading system that it has always had before 1820. The third phase is when the United States wakes up and sees that, or assesses that it faces for the third time in its primacy in the world economy, a threat. The first threat was from the Soviet Union. The second threat was from Japan in the 70s and 80s. And now it faces the third threat. And the US sees China as a threat to its economic, military, and technological dominance. The US worries about weaponization of commodities, continuity of supply being disrupted in electronic goods. It worries about the growth of China trade growth leading to economic growth and leading to higher military spending. And lastly, the US worries about losing the battle for the technologies of the 21st century. And so for all of these reasons, the US is now subordinating its trade policy to its security imperatives. And this means essentially going back to a model of restricting access to the United States based on alliances or on affinity with the US's objectives. And this is what takes us to the current day. It, of course, emasculates many of the principles of the trading system that we have become used to and which we celebrate and adore. But essentially, this is the direction of travel. And I think ultimately the questions this raises obviously are ones to, for the countries, not for countries other than China and the United States, where do we all stand? There are a large number of countries which benefit from this system, which are too small to be able to live on, to maintain their living standards based solely on domestic trade. They need international trade. And then the question really will be, how large is that bloc? And can it stick together and preserve and protect many of the principles that we have found to be so effective since the WTO was created? But essentially, security is back, Hamid. The US has put it back at the core of its approach. Arguably, some people would argue China has done the same. And there's some truth to that. The trading system is therefore adjusting back to an era where security considerations dominate. If anything, it's back to the future.